Welcome to Handi Quilter Watch and Learn. Today we're going to talk all things backing, different types of fabric, how to place your seams, and how to deal with some of those pesky fabrics. I'm Kim Sandberg and you are?
Kristina Whitney.
And we, like I just mentioned, are here to talk all about backings. So Kristina, backings.
Yeah, we get so excited about these fancy quilt tops, and then we're like, oh, let's just throw something on the back.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't really think about the purpose of the backing or how we're going to quilt it. So we're going to talk through some tips today on picking your backing.
Right.
And also how to load your backing for the best results.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
And when we started making a list for this, I think we were both surprised at how many options, at least just with projects we've worked on that are out there. So there's definitely more than just that basic, you know, yardage that matches the front of the quilt. Yeah. So you can try something different. So what's the first thing we're going to talk about?
Well, I'm going to ask our viewers if they've done anything fun for their backing to write that down in the comments. We'd love to hear ideas. And as we go through the video, feel free to add any other comments, and maybe you'll give us some inspiration so we can try some new projects.
I love that.
I love learning from multiple people.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, first backing. This is one of your quilts.
Yes.
This is a denim quilt.
Yes.
Actually, the top is not denim, but the backing is.
So the top is just a regular quilting cotton, and you guys can see it's a pretty simple quilt. This is, we call it our camping quilt, and I wanted to do a very durable fabric on the back of it. So I chose to put denim on it, and you can see that this quilt is, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. Every time we go camping or on a picnic or whatever we use it, I wash it, I throw it in the dryer, and I love that it's aging like a nice pair of blue jeans. I think it looks really great. I know some people can be a little intimidated by using denim because they think it's a really heavyweight fabric, and of course there are heavyweight denims. This is actually like a midweight denim that I used, and it's just from the apparel section of like a big box fabric store.
And this is just a solid piece of denim.
Yep.
So if you were to do, it's like some denim piecing. I know I've got an emergency quilt in my car that's all denim, but it's all pieced. I didn't have any issues with quilting it.
No.
So these Handi Quilter machines, they're workhorses, and they can stitch through that. One tip that I would give, though, is to use the glide foot if possible.
Absolutely.
'Cause that will help go over any of those thick seams where, you know, you get multiple layers of fabric there.
I totally agree. And I think you should be very mindful of where you are placing the seams on the back. If you've got a lot of heavy seams on the front, you maybe want to try not to line those up so much. So absolutely, it's a great fabric to work with, though. I really love it.
One of my favorite things to do with denim is to use like a red thread or something that's going to really contrast.
Yeah, I wasn't that adventurous with this one. I used a nice silver that just blends.
It's perfect, and it gets the job done.
Yep.
So it fits the purpose of what the quilt is for.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's denim.
Okay.
Let's move on to another favorite fabric that people love to put on the backs of their quilts.
Oh, this is such a favorite.
Your quilts leave dog hair.
Yes.
Mine leave Kristina hairs everywhere.
Everywhere.
Okay.
Oh, this is the good old staple, Minky.
Yes, you gotta love yourself a Minky quilt.
Me too.
So, this is fantastic on the back of quilts.
I totally agree.
Those cuddle quilts where you just want to wrap up in them, oh, it's fabulous. I know just last night I made a new Minky quilt, and I had it on my, like next to my bed, and my daughter came in and was cuddled up with it, and she goes, I think this is going to go with me back to my room.
Absolutely.
So I've already lost that quilt.
I know.
But, okay, so working with Minky.
Yeah.
People are terrified of it.
Yeah, because it has stretch in it. Yeah, and you know, it's so often people don't use a stretchy fabric in quilting, and I want to say, why not? I love using Minky. I think it's great for backs, especially. So we have some tips though to help you manage I guess you could say the stretchiness of Minky, and not all types of Minky are the equal amount of stretchy.
Yes.
Did I say that right? Yeah.
That is correct. I had a person bring me some Minky to work with one time, And it was like working with swimsuit material, expanded. It was
like a
stretching
4-way stretch.
all over the place.
Ugh.
And as I would stitch along, the whole thing would just kind of shift. That particular minky I will never work with again.
Yeah, too much stretch.
Too much stretch. This one though, if you look at it here, I'm gonna pull this here.
Okay. And you're pulling, so the, let's see, here's the selvage. So you're pulling
I'm on the
from
cut edge.
The cut edge. So from selvage to selvage is how you're pulling.
So it's got some stretch there.
It does, it does.
Pulling the other direction, I don't really have much stretch.
Right,
So the common question that we get is, which way do you load the stretch?
right.
My answer is whichever way you need to.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. If you are seaming this, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit later in the video, but if you have a seam, that's going to play a big role on which way you're going to load that quilt.
Exactly.
So you can load minky with the stretch going
Across the
or
frame.
the other way.
Height-wise, width-wise, or
Vertically or
height-wise.
horizontally,
There we
whichever
go.
one you choose. But let's give you some tips with both directions.
Right.
Okay, so if I were to take the selvage end and I wanted to pin that on, it's not going to give me much stretch.
No.
So I don't have any issues with pinning it on.
Nope.
My issue is going to come as I'm advancing the fabric.
Right.
If I tighten down on that backing too much, it's going to stretch that fabric.
Yeah.
I'm going to do my stitching, and when I take it off, it's going to shrink back up.
Right.
So you're going to have some issues with that.
You have more draw-in throughout the quilt. I've totally seen that happen where somebody's like, my quilt is like 4 inches shorter than, well, what's on the back? Minky, oh, well, did you stretch it? Maybe.
So here's my tip for that. I loosen up my back. So it's like kind of hanging down underneath. And then I watch underneath as I'm tightening it. And I go by feel and as I'm watching it. So I'll tighten it up. And once I feel just the slightest bit of tension, not pulling it all, but just a slight bit of tension, and I can see that it's not hammocking underneath any longer,
Right.
I'm going to leave it there.
Okay.
I'm not going to tighten down any further.
So we don't get any stretch going this way. Because even when you put the side clamps on, that's not the direction it's going to stretch. So we don't have to worry about that, but it's just the height wise. So.
And you have a great tip for
Yes. So
pinning the other direction, pinning the stretchy side to
I
the
figured
quilt.
out, yeah, because when you're pinning on the stretchy side, all of a sudden it's like 6 inches wider than it's supposed to be. You're like, what happened here? So I had somebody suggest this to me. I take painter's tape and put the tape, I'll just grab some here and show you. And just plain old painter's tape. And I usually stick it on the back side just because it's a little easier to stick it to it. And I just put painter's tape right along that edge that I'm going to tape. Now, what I can do is just pin right through that, and there's no stretch. It takes away. Right over here, you can see how much stretch I still have. That painter's tape, it's like putting a fusible on the back of it, and it stabilizes it. But then when you get done, you can just peel it off. And then, because I know for me, a lot of customers that I've quilted for in the past, quite a few of them will actually want to do, wrap the minky around the edge of the quilt as the binding. And that way it preserves that edge so that we're not losing any of that fabric to be able to use for that.
And that might also help with all of the minky fluffs that get everywhere.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay, I'm going to have to start trying that
I
technique.
know. I have on a minky that was particularly fluffy, I actually used a wider tape and I wrapped it just around the edge. So
fabulous.
There's another little tip that you can try. But yeah, painter's tape, useful for more than just sprucing up a room.
Can't go anywhere without my painter's tape.
I know. And you do have a nice collection of it.
I do. I need some more colors though. Hint, hint.
I know. How many do you have?
I only have 5 colors at the moment.
We'll have to see what we can find.
Okay.
All right, so next.
So let's get rid of this
Okay.
minky.
I'll grab the minky quilt and put it over here on this pile.
You're so good at folding things up. I just
Yeah.
throw it over my shoulder.
It's there.
Okay, wide backs.
Wide backs, they're fantastic for quilting, but
They're a lot to manage.
absolutely, I think it's a great way of saying it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fabric to deal with there.
Trying to get it square, just the bulk of it, and remember which direction you're going. Yeah, it can be tricky, but it's definitely doable.
Oh, yeah,
As a long
absolutely.
arm quilter, I love having these wide backs. I don't have
Me
any
too.
seams to deal with. It's fabulous. and it fits almost all of the quilts unless you have like a 120-inch quilt.
Which you can find backing. I've seen backing that's that wide. Usually the wide backs come in 104 or 108, which is usually more than wide enough for any project you're working on.
Okay, so wide backs. We were having a little discussion yesterday, and we were talking about the chemicals and stuff that are put on the wide backs.
Yeah.
Because they are so wide. So do you want to explain what you were saying yesterday, since you said it so well?
Well, I had it explained to me once, and I have found more success with this. We recommend that you pre-wash wide backs before you quilt on them, with a long arm especially, because wide backs are such a wide piece of fabric. In order to manage it so it can be folded nicely on a bolt at the quilting store, they have a lot of sizing in them. Sizing means starch. And that starch can prevent the fibers from being relaxed enough that the needle can actually stitch through them very easily. So the simple solution is you pre-wash your wide backs. I recommend doing it because I really want to try to prevent any shrinking. I want the shrinking to happen after it's quilted, because I don't pre-wash any of my fabric. That's another topic for another day.
Yeah, we're not going to go there today.
But I will wash it in cold water, and I will lay it flat to dry. If I am going to dry it in the dryer, I will often just do a air tumble. But I have like a front load washer. I'll load it in there, do a high spin, and they're really not that wet when it comes out. Another tip, which Kristina had, which is a really good one, don't actually let it dry all the way.
Yeah.
And why?
Well, when you're loading it, and even if you have like wrinkles in your fabric, it's not wet, you can spritz it, and then as you load, just kind of smooth it out, and it's gonna kind of like iron itself on your pole.
Absolutely.
So you don't have to deal with those wrinkles.
Yeah.
So I've had people that sit there and try to iron these 108-inch
and then you have to fold them up to take them to the quilter.
I'm like, let's just spritz it, roll it on, it'll be nice and flat.
Yep. So if you're pulling it out of the washing machine and it's been on a high spin and it's mostly dry, and of course, this works well for us because we live in the Intermountain West. It's really dry here. We don't have a lot of humidity, but I know that I let it sit in air dry for 20 minutes or so and then load it, and it just does exactly that. It presses out smooth and flat as I roll it on the pole. Yeah. So,
well, let's show them how wide this is.
Yeah, this is very wide.
So
I think we're going to be like clear off camera if we both go. There's a lot of fabric here.
Depending on the size of your frame, this may or may not be a good option.
Yeah, exactly.
So 108 inches, you're going to need what size frame?
You can load 100. You can load 108-inch wide on a 10-foot frame without having to cut it down. Yeah. I know that because I quilt on a 10-foot frame at home. That is exactly enough room.
Yeah. And this is set up at 8 feet.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're a little narrow.
So it won't work on this frame unless we cut it down.
Yeah.
But okay. So that's 108-inch wide.
It's good stuff.
Yep.
We love that wide back.
Okay, let's move into, instead of the type of fabric, let's talk about the print of the fabric.
Let's do.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's always that question, how much do you want the quilting to show on the back of the quilt? So minky is a great choice if you really want the backing to show. Another really great choice is what Kristina's got here.
Solid fabrics.
Yep.
Okay. So this is a solid fabric with kind of a blending thread, and it's almost like a reversible quilt.
Yeah.
Because the quilting shows so much.
Exactly.
So if you want your quilting to show, solid backing is a great option.
Yeah.
It's not always a great option if you maybe struggle with tension, or another situation is if you change your thread color.
Right.
Like your bobbin thread color, because you might not want that to show as much. So here's an example here. This section right through here has an orange thread.
And I love how that contrasts with the with that fabric.
Yes.
It really shows.
Yep. And then this section in here has more of a variegated thread. So if you don't care about the different thread colors showing, solid backs are great.
Yep.
If you want to cover that or cover any tension issues or just be fun and wild and crazy, you can do a busy back.
Yep.
So this one, you cannot really see the quilting.
No. I love how it just blends. I feel like this hides a multitude of choices. We're not going to say mistakes. We're going to say choices. Because just like you said, sometimes it's using the different threads. Sometimes it's, oh, I forgot to change my tension when I went to that different thread. Yeah. Lots of different reasons. Also, I also think that a quilt that's going to be used a lot, it just maybe wears a little better. I don't know.
I always do recommend to beginner quilters though.
Yeah.
If you want to have the best results, use a busy back.
Totally agree with that.
Once your confidence is increased a little bit more, play with those solid backs.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really fun to find a really bright, fun print to put on the back of a quilt, especially if it is a quilt that's going to hang on a wall or something. It's like that really fun just pop of, oh wow, that wasn't what I was expecting on the back of that quilt.
Exactly. Crazy cats.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay, another fun thing that you can do with these backs is on that first one, that solid one, I mentioned that I used a blending thread. You could use a contrasting color thread if you really wanted to get wild and crazy.
Yeah. And then it really would make it feel like a reversible quilt because the quilting truly, truly becomes the star on the back with that solid. I love it. That's great.
Okay. So making that choice between solid and
a busy print.
Oh, here's another fun bag.
Yeah.
So this is kind of almost a combination of the two. It's not a busy print. So tell us about this backing, Kim.
So this is actually some hand-dyed fabric that I dyed with my chapter of the Modern Quilt Guild does a dyeing. We do a dye day every summer. I know. Dyeing fabric. And a lot of these fabrics I've done and I just cannot bring myself to cut them up because I love the pattern that went on this one. This was one that we folded and I don't even remember exactly what I did. But I love using these as backs, especially on a quilt that I know is going to hang on a wall. And it's kind of like I said earlier, it's fun when you take it off and see that. It's a way to show off this special fabric without actually making it the focal point of a quilt. So
I think it's great. That would be something fun to even use for the front of a quilt.
It really would. It really, really would. But I like to use some of these special ones that I just can't bear to cut smaller as backing on a quilt.
I was thinking like a whole cloth.
Oh yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah.
I actually have a couple that really lend themselves to this. This was one that didn't quite so much as much. Oh, now this is a fun quilt.
This is a bigger one.
Yeah. There we go. We can put it up here like this.
Whee!
So.
Okay, this is another one of Kim's quilts.
Let's not focus on the tension issues we have here. So this is a quilt that, and we can just flip up and show the front of it. So this was a quilt that it was a stitch and flip on a lot of these. So I had all these big triangles left over. So they're so big I wanted to use them for something.
Okay,
so,
explain stitch and flip for people that might not know what that term means.
So you take and put two pieces of fabric together, sew from corner to corner, and then you trim away that extra triangle of fabric. It's pretty common, especially when you're doing half square triangles. It's a great technique because it helps stabilize that fabric because then you're not sewing along a stretchy edge with the bias. Okay. So it's a great technique, but especially on something like this where these are big blocks. I think these blocks are like, I don't know, 15 or 16 inch blocks. They're big blocks because they go clear out. I mean, they're really big blocks. I couldn't bring myself to just throw away. Like sometimes those little triangle corners are, you know, a half an inch, whatever. I feel fine. Those are stuffing for dog beds. But I wanted to use these ones. So I took and actually pieced them together and I created kind of this fun section down the center of the back of this quilt. I did use a wide back here, or actually it's not a wide back, it's just yardage here. But I of course had to sew two pieces together. So I put this fun little piece here in the center through it, just using all those little bits and pieces that were left over.
That is super fun. I've also seen people that have ended up with an extra block or something, and they'll use that extra block as their label.
I love that.
So lots of fun things that you can do to incorporate those extra pieces.
Yeah, and just to put something fun on the back. Yeah. I know that when I get done with a quilt, I'm done with that fabric. And so the more of it I can put in the back of the quilt, the less chance of me having to try to figure out how to use it later.
And here's another example
Speaking
of one of yours.
This is a really good example of this.
Just using up all that extra fabric from the top.
This was, the front of the quilt is a pieced barn star, and this was all the fabric that was left over, and I just pieced it together to make the back. So I've got a big section of this plaid that I had yardage of, and then the rest of it, I just put together all the little bits and pieces here. And this one's actually kind of a combination of a few of the things we've talked about, because you can see here that I've got some different colors of thread. So I've got some black thread that I used here, and then I've got some colors that blend a little more. So it just creates a fun, interesting back of this quilt. I always have people that comment on this one and say, I like the back better than I like the front. And I'm always like, me too.
Yeah. I did a wedding quilt like that. I spent more time on the backing than I did on the top.
Oh yeah, because you have to like make it all fit, and you don't have a pattern to follow. But I think it's really fun. I think it's fun to incorporate that. It makes the quilt very unique because nobody else is going to have exactly the same scraps left over that you are.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I want to show my favorite part right here. So this is the binding, this dark green.
Yeah.
But look how it's pieced, like from this little tiny point out into kind of a triangle shape, and then it gets larger.
Yeah. So that's
seriously utilizing what you have.
Yeah.
I love it. It also saves money.
Yeah, it does.
You're not having to buy the backing fabric, and you're not stuck with scrap fabric that you might not want for something else.
Right.
So you're utilizing it to the fullest.
Yes. And like I mentioned before, when I get done with a quilt, I'm done with the fabric, and so that's why so many of the backs on my quilts are pieced, because I just want to use up the rest of that fabric. Oh, one more of my quilts.
Let's. We're getting to the end.
So.
Double-sided.
Double-sided quilts. How many of you had tried a double-sided quilt? I've done one. That was truly a double-sided quilt, meaning I created two tops, and then I decided to put them together to create a quilt. So this is the front of the quilt. It's a pretty simple pattern here. It's essentially a half square triangle with a couple of squares and other triangles put in here. Nothing super complicated. But when I bought this fabric, there was a jelly roll on sale. And so I bought that too, thinking, oh, I'm gonna make a second quilt. When I got done with both of them, I was like, I don't want two entire quilts. So I pieced this entire back with the jelly roll and then the leftover strips. So I've got a lot of strips across here. We have this fun square detail that I did down here. Anyway, it's a fun quilt because it's a quilt that I will fold and display both ways, just depending on what I'm doing. And this quilt's actually gotten a lot of wear.
So it's kind of similar to the ones that we showed with using up our leftover scraps, but these were intentionally made as two tops. Okay, so it gets a little tricky to actually quilt those two tops to get them lined up. So let's pull out this next one, or did you have a tip first?
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about this one for a second. So this one does line up very, very well because I quilted this on a stationary machine, which meant that when I put the quilt top and back together, I did not have any extra seam allowance around the edges, and Kristina is going to talk about this a little more. I spray basted the top and the back and the batting together, so I was able to line everything up very exactly and precisely and keep it that way. Now, when you're doing that on a stationary machine, it's really easy to do that because just the way that you can lay everything out. But when you're loading it on a frame, there's some extra challenges, aren't there?
There are.
So Kristina's got a great one here that she actually just finished up and came up with a great way to deal with the front and back matching up.
This is another one of my grandma's quilts. Okay. I don't know which one's the top and which one's the back. Actually, I do because I used up all my spare bobbins.
Right. Oh.
And so I've got varieties of colors on one side.
Okay.
Yeah,
but it's just squares. This is, I shouldn't say it's just squares. It is.
If I flip this over, you can't tell which side is which.
Yeah.
It's all the same. And so when I was loading it, I wanted to try to keep it as lined up as I could, but I needed to have extra fabric to make it wide enough to actually load it.
On the frame.
On the frame. So I added about an extra 4 inches on all 4 sides of one of the tops.
Okay.
We'll call that the bottom from now on.
Top B, bottom, top, bottom.
Yes. So I added that extra fabric, and then I was able to load it. And then when I started up at the top, I did my plumb line, I made sure that I lined up the two tops from the very beginning.
Okay.
And then each time I advanced, I would go over to the side, and I'm going to pull this over, see if we can see. Hopefully I'll get a good example. I would pull up the top and the batting, find where my seam was on that backing, and then take my top and try to make sure that it was lined up so that as I did my stitching, it would stay lined up. And I would do that on each advance,
On both
making
sides.
sure that the bottom or the top, one of them didn't get stretched further than the other and get it shifting.
Okay.
So I had to take a little bit of extra time, make sure I basted really well down those sides, and then by the time I got to the bottom, I was pretty close.
Yeah.
So I did do a little bit of trimming, but now I can do the binding, and the quilt can be used either way. And I was able to use up twice as many of my grandma squares in one quilt.
I love
So-
it. I love it.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
So that was fun.
Yeah.
Okay. One last
Yes.
quilt backing that I want to talk about.
It's the one behind us, right?
The one behind us.
I love this one that you did.
So panels.
Yeah.
They're another great option for putting on backings.
Yep.
So here's a little background story. My Alaska quilt.
Yes.
You know all about it. I'm
I
sure our
do.
viewers know about it. I made the Alaska quilt from Laundry Basket Quilts because I grew up in Alaska. I had a last-minute emergency trip to Alaska before my parents and my in-laws both decided to move. And every time I went up there to visit, I would collect some Alaska fabric.
Right.
And I was going to make myself an Alaska quilt. But then I made the Alaska pattern quilt.
Yeah.
And then I had all this fabric, and I didn't know what to do with it. And it started to weigh on me, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm like, what am I going to do with this? And then I had the Alaska quilt pattern that I had created. I'm like, what am I going to put on the back of this?
Yeah.
So I decided to kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
So I took a couple of the panels that I had from Alaska and all of the Alaska fabric that I'd collected over the years. And again, I'm a little obsessed with blue.
You are.
And so,
sure.
luckily, most of the fabrics kind of went together, sort of.
Oh, it
and,
looks great.
I was able to piece it all together, and that will now become the backing for my Alaska quilt.
I love it. I love that there's a story behind the fabric too.
Yeah.
I think that that's really fun. And what a great use of incorporating the panels in there. I think panels are fantastic to use on the back of a quilt. I think it kind of goes along the same idea, like me using my hand-dyed fabric. It's not something that you necessarily want to cut up and incorporate in the front of a quilt, but you want to have a place where you can showcase it, right?
Yeah, because you see those panels and you just have to buy them, and then you get home and you're like, what am I going to do with this? So incorporating them into the back is a great thing.
It totally is. Well, hopefully we covered everything.
I think we did.
Be sure to let us know if we didn't answer questions you have about backing. We're always happy to answer in the comments. We love getting feedback from our viewers. So let us know if there's something we didn't cover or something you still have a question about, and we'll see what we can do about discovering an answer for you. So we want to say thanks for watching this week. Be sure to give us a subscribe and like, and have fun quilting.